Claire had always dreamed of her wedding day. As a little girl, she had imagined it countless times. Her in a beautiful white dress, standing at the altar with Michael, her soulmate. Their love story had been everything she hoped for, the kind of fairy tale love everyone envied. But no one could have prepared her for what happened that day. The day that shattered her dream and turned it into a nightmare. The day began like any other, with Claire bustling around in her apartment, putting the finishing touches on her wedding dress. It was the kind of dress that made you feel like a princess, with delicate lace and intricate beadwork, shimmering under the soft morning light. She smiled at her reflection, imagining how Michael's eyes would light up when he saw her. "Are you ready, Claire?" Amy, her best friend, asked as she poked her head into the room, breaking her daydream. "I think so. I just can't believe today is finally here," Claire replied, her voice full of excitement but tinged with a little nervousness. Amy smiled, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "You're going to be amazing. Michael is one lucky guy." But despite Amy's encouraging words, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Michael had been distant lately, withdrawing into himself. She didn't want to admit it, but his behavior had been different. Perhaps the pressure of their upcoming wedding was getting to him, but Claire chose to push those thoughts aside. Today was about them, their love, their future. At the venue, everything seemed perfect. The venue was a stunning old church, the kind that looked like it was straight out of a storybook, with high ceilings and stained glass windows casting colorful reflections across the room. The guests were seated. Everyone was excited, and Claire felt a rush of joy. But as Claire stepped into the church, she noticed Michael standing at the altar, with his mother, Olivia, beside him. Olivia's presence was unmistakable, as always. She had a way of making herself the center of attention in every room she entered, especially when it came to Michael. And Claire noticed something else. Michael didn't smile when he saw her. Instead, his expression was tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, Claire felt a pang of doubt. "Michael!" she whispered to herself as she walked down the aisle. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the church, amplifying the sudden unease she felt. The air was thick, heavy with expectations. When she reached Michael, he took her hand, but his grip was stiff, almost uncomfortable. "You look beautiful," he said, though his words lacked the warmth Claire had hoped for. "Thank you," Claire replied, forcing a smile, but her heart began to race. What was going on? Why did Michael seem so distant today? As the ceremony began, Claire tried to focus on the vows they were exchanging, but her mind kept wandering. She couldn't help but notice how Michael kept glancing at his mother, Olivia, who was seated in the front row, her eyes fixed on Claire with a critical gaze. Claire's smile faltered as she caught Olivia's cold stare. The ceremony went on, but the tension between Claire and Michael was palpable. There were moments when Claire caught Michael staring at her, but his eyes were filled with something else. Frustration, maybe even resentment. Every word of their vows felt like it was slipping further away from her, as if the love they once shared was being buried under layers of pressure and expectations. As they exchanged rings, Claire's hand shook, but Michael didn't seem to notice. Instead, he was looking at Olivia, as if seeking her approval, her validation. Claire felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had always known that Michael's mother was controlling, but seeing it play out so clearly on their wedding day made her heart ache. Finally, as the ceremony reached its climax, Michael leaned in to kiss her. But instead of the sweet, tender kiss Claire had imagined, Michael's lips brushed against hers with a coldness that sent a chill down her spine. As the kiss ended, Claire looked up at him, searching his eyes for the warmth she had always known, but she found nothing. Before the guests could even react, Olivia stood up from her seat, interrupting the moment. "Michael, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Michael hesitated, looking at Claire as if asking for permission. Claire's face flushed with embarrassment as she nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "Claire, I'll be right back," Michael said, his voice strained. The moment he walked away, Claire was left standing there, alone, in front of everyone. Her dream wedding had turned into a public spectacle, and she could feel the eyes of the guests on her, judging her, waiting to see what would happen next. The next few moments were a blur. Claire's mind raced as she tried to hold it together. Her thoughts kept circling back to Michael's coldness, to Olivia's interference, and to the growing realization that something was terribly wrong. When Michael finally returned, he had a tense look on his face. "We need to talk," he said, pulling her aside. "About what?" Claire asked, her heart pounding. "About what's been going on," he replied, his voice low. "I've been under a lot of pressure, and you don't understand what it's like for me." "Pressure from who? Your mother?" Claire's voice shook with frustration. "I'm standing here, ready to start our life together, and you can't even look at me without her approval." Michael's face turned red with anger. "You don't get it, Claire. You don't understand how difficult this is for me." Suddenly, his fist clenched, and before Claire could react, he slapped her. The sting of the slap echoed in the church, and Claire's world spun in a moment of pure disbelief. Her vision blurred, and she stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching for her cheek. The silence in the church was deafening. The gasps of the guests filled the air, but Claire couldn't hear them. She was frozen, staring at Michael in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Her heart shattered in that moment, as if everything she had believed about their love had just been ripped away. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and rage. "How could you do this to me, on our wedding day?" Michael stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with regret. But the damage had already been done. The perfect dream of their wedding day was gone, replaced by something much darker. Claire's tears fell freely as she turned and fled the church, leaving everything behind. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Claire realized that the wedding she had always dreamed of was no longer about love. It was about survival. She had to find out what was happening to her life, her marriage, and most importantly, what had happened to the man she once loved. The heavy silence after Claire ran out of the church was deafening. She barely noticed the cool evening air biting at her skin, or the blur of cars passing by. Her heart was racing, her hands trembling as she clutched her wedding dress. This wasn't the way she imagined her life unfolding. The day she had dreamed of for years had just been stolen from her in the blink of an eye. As she stumbled through the street, her mind was in turmoil. How could he do this to me? The question echoed through her brain over and over again as she found herself at the nearest park bench, sinking down into it. She tried to steady her breathing, but every breath felt sharp, painful. The sting on her cheek was a reminder of the violence she never thought Michael was capable of. The slap wasn't just physical, it was a strike at her heart, at the trust she had placed in him. How had they gotten to this point? Just days ago, Michael had been the man she had pledged her life to, and now, he was a stranger. She couldn't wrap her head around it. "Claire!" A voice suddenly pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. She looked up to see Amy running toward her. Amy's face was filled with concern as she rushed to her side. "What happened? I saw you run out of there. You're shaking!" Claire didn't know how to answer. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She closed it, trying to find the words to explain the storm that had just passed through her. Amy sat down beside her, not speaking, just waiting. Claire's tears started to fall again, quietly at first, but then they came in waves. He slapped me, Amy. Right there, in front of everyone. In front of the whole damn wedding." Amy's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Michael slapped you? On your wedding day?" Claire nodded, her throat tightening. "It was all wrong. I don't even know what happened. We were fine. Well, I thought we were fine. But then everything just exploded." Amy reached over and took Claire's hand. "He's not the man you thought he was, Claire. He shouldn't have laid a hand on you. That's not love." Claire stared at their hands, the weight of her reality sinking in. She knew Amy was right, but the part of her that still clung to hope, to the dream of her perfect life with Michael, wanted to deny it. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe he's just under a lot of pressure. But deep down, Claire knew that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. Michael had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Claire stood up suddenly, the decision solidifying in her mind. I need to get away. I need to think. I need space. Amy stood up with her. I'm not going to leave you alone tonight, Claire. Come with me. You don't need to face this alone. They walked together, not saying much as Claire's mind raced. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to help her hold herself together until Amy took her arm and guided her through the night. The two of them went to Amy's apartment, where Claire collapsed onto the couch. Amy made tea, but Claire didn't feel like drinking. She stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, but everything seemed blurry, detached from her. Amy sat beside her, waiting patiently. Tell me everything, Amy finally said, her voice soft. Claire took a deep breath and started to talk, telling Amy everything she could remember, about the tension she'd felt between her and Michael leading up to the wedding, how Olivia had dominated their lives in small but insidious ways, the tiny arguments that had started to surface more frequently in the days before the wedding. It all seemed so perfect, Claire murmured, shaking her head. But now I see it. I see all the signs. Michael couldn't even look at me during our vows. He was too busy looking at his mother, like he needed her approval more than mine. Amy let out a quiet, disgusted breath. I hate how Olivia controls him. It's like you're not even in the picture. She's the only one that matters to him. Claire nodded, her eyes red. I always thought things would change once we got married. I thought he would see that we were a family now, that he would put me first. But I was wrong. She paused, her voice cracking. Oh, and now I can't even look at him the same way. Amy squeezed her hand. You don't have to. You deserve so much better than that, Claire. You deserve to be loved, respected, and treated like an equal, not as a project or an afterthought. Claire took another deep breath, trying to gather her strength. I don't know what to do next. I don't even know if I can go back there, to that house, to him. You don't have to go back. You're stronger than this, and you'll figure it out, one step at a time. But not right now. Tonight, just rest. Let's deal with all of this tomorrow. Claire looked at Amy, a small smile tugging at her lips. Thank you for being here. I don't know what I would do without you. Amy smiled back, a genuine warm smile. You'll never be alone. You have me. Always. Later that night, as Claire lay in Amy's guest bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness in her chest. She wanted to believe that Michael could change, that he could apologize and make everything right again. But deep down, she knew that the man who had slapped her was not the man she had married. The truth was, she didn't know who he was anymore. The next morning, Claire woke up early, her mind still spinning with questions, doubts, and confusion. She felt drained, emotionally exhausted. There was only one thing left to do. She needed to confront Michael, to hear the truth from him, no matter how much it hurt. She called him. His voice was shaky when he answered. Claire, I'm so sorry. Please, just come home. We can talk about everything. I'll make it right, I promise. Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Michael, I don't think you understand. You crossed a line yesterday. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that. Michael was quiet for a moment, and then she heard the familiar sound of him pacing. Please, just listen to me. I'm under so much stress. You don't know what I'm dealing with. What you're dealing with? Claire's voice rose in frustration. What about what I'm dealing with? You slapped me, Michael. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You hurt me more than I ever thought you could. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Michael spoke. I didn't mean to. I was just so angry. But I need you to come home. I'll fix this, I promise. I love you, Claire. She hung up the phone, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was telling her something different. As she stared at the phone in her hand, Claire realized that she couldn't go back to the life she once had. She couldn't go back to Michael. Not the way things were. For the first time in her life, Claire truly understood what it meant to let go. As painful as it was, she had to do it. The man she loved, the man she had promised to spend her life with, was gone. And in his place was someone she no longer recognized. Claire spent the next few days in a fog of emotions. Each morning, she woke up with a feeling of dread, the weight of the previous day's events still hanging over her, like a dark cloud. She'd never expected her life to change so abruptly. One moment, she was planning her future with Michael, envisioning their life together, and the next, she was reeling from the painful reality of what had happened. The slap, the humiliation, the coldness in his eyes. They haunted her. Amy had been her rock during these dark times. She hadn't left Claire's side since the wedding, insisting that Claire stay at her place. They spent most of their time talking about everything and nothing, trying to keep Claire distracted, though the pain was always just beneath the surface. Claire knew she needed to make a decision, but the uncertainty was paralyzing. On the fourth day after the wedding, Claire received a message that would change everything. It was from Arthur Stern, a man she didn't recognize. The message read, "Mrs. Griffin, my name is Arthur Stern. I'm the father of the man who caused your accident. Please, I need to speak with you." The words struck her like a lightning bolt. Accident? What accident? Claire sat frozen, staring at her phone in disbelief. Her mind immediately began racing, trying to piece together the meaning of this strange message. Had Michael been involved in something else? Something she didn't know about? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Amy, holding a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked at Claire with a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Claire handed her the phone without saying a word. Amy read the message and frowned. "That's odd. Do you know who Arthur Stern is?" Claire shook her head. "No, but I think this has to do with Michael." "An accident? What accident?" Amy placed the coffee on the table and sat next to her, her voice calm but firm. "You need to find out, Claire. If there's something more to this, you need to know." With a deep breath, Claire made up her mind. She replied to Arthur, agreeing to meet him. The message back came almost immediately. "I'll be at the Golden Leaf Cafe tomorrow at noon. Please come." The next day, Claire dressed carefully, trying to muster up the courage to meet this stranger who seemed to hold a key to her past. When she arrived at the cafe, she felt the sharp pang of anxiety twist in her chest. The cafe was quiet, upscale, the kind of place Michael would frequent. She scanned the room for Arthur, who was sitting at a corner table, his face weary but kind. As Claire walked toward him, Arthur stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Griffin, I'm glad you came. Please sit down." Claire sat across from him, still trying to process the confusion in her mind. "I don't understand. What accident are you talking about?" Arthur's eyes grew sad as he began to explain. "The night of the wedding, your husband Michael wasn't alone in his car. There was a woman with him, and my son was driving the car that hit yours." Claire's stomach dropped at his words. "What do you mean, your son? What does this have to do with Michael?" Arthur took a deep breath. "My son was the one who caused the accident. But it wasn't a mistake. Michael was involved in this, Claire, and he hasn't told you the whole truth." Claire's mind was spinning. "What truth? What are you saying?" Arthur pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "This is hard for me to say, but I owe you the truth. Michael wasn't alone that night. He had a mistress, a woman he'd been seeing for months. She's the one who was supposed to be in the car with him, but when he saw who was driving, when he saw you, he panicked. He told my son to scare you, to follow your car, to make you feel afraid." The words hit Claire like a blow to the chest. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was trying to hurt me?" Arthur nodded. "Not directly, but he put you in that position. He used my son to do it. My son didn't know what he was doing. He was drunk and confused, and he followed the wrong car. He hit yours by mistake." Claire's vision blurred as the weight of the revelation pressed down on her. "I had no idea," she whispered, barely able to keep her composure. He He wanted me to be scared? He put my life in danger? Arthur's face was filled with regret. I don't know why he did it. But you deserve to know the truth, Claire. You deserve to know that you weren't the one at fault here. Claire closed her eyes, taking in the information. She had spent days blaming herself, trying to make sense of what had happened. But this was worse than anything she could have imagined. Michael had put her in harm's way, not because of love or some mistake, but because of his own selfishness and fear. Arthur continued, I know this is a lot to process, but there's more. I've already spoken to a top surgeon who's willing to help you, Claire. He can fix your face, help you heal. I'll pay for everything. I owe you this. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for the folder Arthur had placed in front of her. She flipped through the papers, looking at the credentials of the surgeon he mentioned. It was all real, and it was all too much to process. I don't know if I can accept this, Claire said, her voice weak. I don't know if I can ever go back to Michael. Arthur's voice softened. I understand, but I think you need to hear one more thing. Claire looked up at him, her curiosity piqued. What? Arthur hesitated, then spoke with a heavy heart. Michael wasn't just seeing this woman. She was married. She was someone's wife. And Michael knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing. The blood drained from Claire's face as she took in this new piece of information. You mean, he was having an affair? Arthur nodded solemnly. Yes. And I think you need to know, Claire. Michael wasn't just emotionally neglecting you. He was lying to you, betraying you, in ways you never knew. Claire's mind reeled. She felt a coldness spread through her as everything she thought she knew about Michael collapsed. The man she had married was a stranger. The love she had once felt for him had been a lie. As Claire left the cafe, the world around her felt distant, as if she were walking in a fog. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been set into motion years ago, that Michael had made choices long before she ever realized. The next day, as she sat in her apartment, the phone buzzed again. It was Michael. His voice was filled with desperation. Claire, please, you have to listen. I love you. I'm so sorry for everything. Please come home. We can fix this. We can make it right. But Claire knew the truth now. She couldn't go back. She couldn't undo the damage. She couldn't forgive him. Not yet. Not after everything. She took a deep breath, looking out the window at the city below. This was her moment. She had to let go. For herself. For her future. She texted back, I'm done, Michael. Don't call me again. And just like that, Claire's life changed forever. Claire woke up the next morning, feeling a strange emptiness that settled deep in her chest. The night had been long and restless, filled with unsettling thoughts and the harsh truth of her situation. She stared at the ceiling, her mind still replaying the conversation with Arthur, his revelation about Michael's betrayal, and the cold finality of her decision to leave him. The man she thought she knew, the man she married, was someone else entirely. She felt raw, exposed, as if the very foundation of her identity had been torn away. It was hard to look in the mirror and see the woman who had once been so full of hope, so certain of her place in the world. Now she didn't know who she was anymore. I should have seen it, she muttered to herself, rubbing her temples. She had ignored the signs for so long. Michael's increasing distance, his constant need for approval from his mother, Olivia, the way he would cancel plans or show up late to things that mattered to her. She had chalked it up to stress, to work, to life. But the truth was much more complicated, and it was something she wasn't ready to face until now. The doorbell rang, cutting through her thoughts. Claire wasn't expecting anyone. She got up slowly, her feet dragging as she made her way to the door. When she opened it, she found Amy standing there, holding a large bag of takeout. I thought you could use some comfort food, Amy said with a smile, though her eyes were full of concern. Claire stepped aside, letting her in. Thanks, Amy. You're too good to me. Amy placed the bag on the kitchen counter and opened it, revealing two large containers of macaroni and cheese, Claire's favorite. I figured you needed a little extra love today. Claire smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't know if food will fix this, but I appreciate it. Amy pulled out a chair and sat down, watching Claire closely. You don't have to talk about it yet if you're not ready, but I'm here. I'm always here, Claire. Claire exhaled slowly and sat down across from her friend. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to listen until now. I don't even know where to begin, she admitted. It's like everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life with Michael, was a lie. I'm so angry, Amy. So damn angry. But I don't even know who to be angry at anymore. Amy nodded sympathetically. You're angry because you were betrayed, Claire. By Michael, by Olivia, by everyone who made you feel small, like you weren't enough. Claire looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her fingers. I'm angry at myself, for not seeing it, for ignoring all the red flags. I've been so blind, Amy. You weren't blind, Claire. You were in love. And love can cloud your judgment. But you're not blind now. You see things for what they are, and that's the first step. Claire thought about those words as they sat in silence for a moment. She felt the weight of the grief she had been carrying for so long. She had loved Michael with all her heart, but now she had to let go. And it was harder than she ever imagined. But deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. Do you think I'm making the right choice? She asked, looking at Amy. Leaving him. Amy took a deep breath, then spoke. I think it's the hardest choice, but I think it's the right one. Michael has shown you who he really is, and you deserve someone who values you, who respects you, not someone who uses you as an emotional punching bag. Claire nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. I feel like I'm drowning, Amy. I thought I knew what love was. I thought I knew what a healthy relationship was. But now, I don't even know who I am anymore. Amy reached out and squeezed her hand. You're still Claire. You've just been through something incredibly painful, but that doesn't change who you are at your core. You're strong. You'll find your way back to yourself. And I'll be here, every step of the way. Claire smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her, knowing she wasn't alone in this. The truth was still too fresh, too raw, but Amy's words gave her something to hold on to. Later that evening, after they finished their meal, Amy left, promising to check in the next day. Claire felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness after her friend's departure. The apartment was too quiet. The reality of her situation hit her once again, and she couldn't escape the crushing weight of it. She walked to the window and stared out at the city below, the lights flickering in the distance. The world was moving on, but Claire felt like she was standing still. She had to make a decision. She had to take the next step, even though she didn't know what that looked like yet. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Michael. I'm so sorry for everything. Please talk to me. We can fix this, Claire. She stared at the screen, her heart heavy. Fix this? How could they fix something that was broken beyond repair? She had spent so much of herself trying to make it work, trying to please him, trying to be the perfect wife. But now, she realized she couldn't fix him. She couldn't fix their broken marriage. She had to fix herself first. With trembling hands, she typed a response. I can't do this anymore, Michael. It's over. She stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send. There was no going back now. She had made her choice. As the message sent, she felt a strange sense of relief, followed by an equally overwhelming sense of fear. But deep down, Claire knew it was the right decision. For the first time in months, she felt like she was taking control of her life again. The tears came, but this time, they were different. They weren't tears of sorrow or confusion. They were tears of release. She had let go of the past, and now she was ready to move forward. Claire felt a strange stillness in her apartment the morning after sending Michael the message. She had expected the weight of her decision to crash down on her, but instead, there was a quiet clarity. a sense of freedom that she hadn't felt in months. Still, the uncertainty about the future loomed over her, casting a shadow over her small moments of peace. She was alone now, but the echo of Michael's absence felt louder than ever. The phone vibrated beside her on the coffee table, pulling her from her thoughts. The screen lit up with a text notification from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Is this Claire Griffin? I have something important to tell you about the night of the accident." Her pulse quickened. Claire's fingers hovered over the screen. Could this be someone with more information about Michael, or perhaps about the crash? The mention of the accident triggered a flood of questions she hadn't fully processed yet. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "I need to meet you. There's a lot you don't know. Meet me at the park near your place, 3 p.m. today. It's important." She stared at the message for a long moment. Something about the urgency in the tone of the text felt unsettling, yet she knew she couldn't ignore it. She had to know the full truth about everything, especially about Michael's involvement in the crash and what had been happening behind her back. She glanced at the clock, just a few hours before she needed to leave. The wait felt like an eternity. When the time finally came, Claire pulled herself together, putting on a simple jacket and stepping out into the brisk afternoon air. The park was just a short walk away, and she arrived early, hoping to see whoever had contacted her. The trees in the park were just starting to turn for the fall, their leaves swirling on the ground in a dance of orange and gold. Claire found a bench to sit on, waiting, her heart pounding with every passing minute. She tried to push the anxiety from her mind, but found it difficult to ignore. What if it was another trick, another way to manipulate her? What if it was just someone trying to take advantage of her confusion? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "Claire?" Claire looked up to see a woman standing in front of her. She was in her mid-30s, with brown hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, wearing a simple black coat. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize her, but there was something familiar about her. "Yes?" Claire replied, standing up slowly. The woman smiled faintly, but her eyes were full of regret. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I work with Michael. I need to explain what happened that night." Claire's stomach churned. Sarah's name was familiar, but she couldn't place her right away. "What do you mean? What happened that night?" Sarah hesitated before sitting down on the bench beside Claire. She glanced around the park nervously, as if making sure no one could overhear them. "I don't know how to say this, but that night wasn't an accident. Michael didn't just hit your car by mistake. He was following you on purpose." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean following me? Why?" Sarah lowered her voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "Michael. He was seeing someone else. A woman. He told me to follow you, to scare you, to make sure you knew what he was going through. But I didn't know you were the one in the car. I didn't know it was you." The weight of Sarah's words hit Claire like a sledgehammer. Michael had planned this. He had sent someone to stalk her, to make her afraid, just to control her. The betrayal felt deeper than anything Claire could have imagined. "Why would he do that?" Claire asked, her voice trembling with anger. "Why didn't you stop him?" Sarah looked down, her hands wringing together nervously. I didn't know how far he'd gone. I thought it was just a misunderstanding at first. But when I saw you, when I realized who you were, I panicked. I tried to tell him to stop, but it was too late." Claire's mind was spinning, her emotions in turmoil. She had spent days, weeks even, trying to understand Michael's behavior. She had always been the one to blame herself, to think she wasn't good enough. But now it was clear. Michael had been the one controlling her, manipulating her. "How long has this been going on?" Claire asked, her voice quiet but filled with intensity. "How long has he been cheating on me?" Sarah sighed, looking away. "I don't know exactly when it started, but I know it's been a while. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed me off. He was too wrapped up in his own world, in his own lies. I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, Claire. I just, I wanted you to know the truth. Claire's chest tightened as the pieces began to fall into place. Michael's coldness, his evasiveness, his constant need for approval, it all made sense now. He had been living a double life, and she had been the one kept in the dark. The truth stung, but it was also freeing. "Thank you for telling me," Claire said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I had no idea. All this time, I thought it was me. That I wasn't enough for him." Sarah shook her head. "No, this isn't about you. It was never about you. Michael has issues, Claire. He couldn't love anyone properly because he didn't love himself, and he used you to fill that void." Claire felt a wave of relief mixed with bitterness. She wasn't the one to blame. She wasn't the one who had failed. She had loved with all her heart, but Michael had never truly loved her. Not the way she deserved. "I have to let go of him," Claire said softly to herself, more than to Sarah. "I have to let go of everything he was." Sarah nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "It's going to hurt, but you deserve so much more than this. You deserve someone who sees you for who you really are, someone who treats you with the respect and love you've given him." Claire took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she had to face the full reality of Michael's betrayal. But she knew it had to happen. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of his lies. "Thank you for telling me. I need to process this, but I'm done with him. I'm done with everything that's been holding me back." As she left the park that afternoon, Claire felt a strange peace settle in her chest. It wasn't the relief she had hoped for, but it was the beginning of something new. She had made the decision to move on. Michael's chapter in her life was closed, and she was ready to begin the next one. The days after Claire's meeting with Sarah were a blur. She couldn't shake the weight of the truth she'd learned. The truth that Michael had been living a lie, one that he had carefully constructed around her. It was almost too much to comprehend, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time in months, Claire felt the shackles of her old life slowly start to loosen. The emotional toll of the past few weeks had drained her, and she found herself unable to sleep. Her mind was constantly racing with thoughts of Michael, of the lies, of the affair, and the cruel betrayal. But it was in this turmoil that she found clarity. Claire knew she had to make one final step in order to truly move forward. She needed to confront Michael. The decision wasn't an easy one. The thought of seeing him again, of facing the man who had once been her everything, sent waves of anxiety through her. But deep down, she knew it was necessary. She had to take control of the situation. She couldn't keep running from the truth. On the evening she decided to call Michael, her heart was pounding in her chest. It had been days since they'd last spoken, and Claire had spent the time reflecting on what she wanted, what she truly needed. She picked up her phone, hesitated for a moment, and dialed his number. The phone rang, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, Michael answered. "Claire!" His voice sounded strained, but there was a note of desperation in it. "Please, just hear me out. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to explain." Claire could hear the guilt in his tone, and for a brief moment, her heart softened. But only briefly. She reminded herself of the slap, the lies, the betrayal. She had no more room for excuses. "I don't need you to explain, Michael," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I know everything." There was a long silence on the other end. Claire could almost hear him processing her words, his mind racing to find something to say. "What do you mean?" he finally asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What have you heard?" "I've heard the truth," Claire said, her voice growing stronger. "I know about the accident, and I know about the woman you've been seeing." Michael's breath hitched, and Claire could feel the weight of his shame through the phone. "Claire, I never meant for it to go this far. You have to believe me." "I do believe you, Michael," she said quietly, "but not in the way you think. I believe that you never loved me the way I thought you did. I believe that everything I thought we had was built on lies." Michael's voice cracked. I do love you. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't want to hurt you. I was just confused. I've been under a lot of pressure. Claire could feel her chest tighten. The old Claire would have believed him. She would have given him another chance, would have let him twist the words just enough to make it seem like it was all her fault. But this Claire, the one who had faced the truth, couldn't be manipulated anymore. Pressure? She repeated. Is that what this is about? You hurt me, Michael. You betrayed me, and now you want to blame it on pressure? It's not like that, he pleaded. I never wanted to hurt you. I made a mistake. Please, come home. Let's fix this. We can make it right. Claire closed her eyes, the anger swelling within her. This was the moment. She could feel the final thread of their relationship slipping away, and she knew she couldn't hold on any longer. No, Michael, it's over. The words were final, irreversible. There was no going back now. I'm done. There was a long silence. Claire could hear the sound of Michael breathing heavily, but he didn't speak. I'm not coming back, Claire added softly. I can't. I don't want to be in a relationship where I have to question my worth, where I have to beg for respect and love. I'm not your project, and I'm not here to fix you. Michael let out a bitter laugh, but it was hollow. So that's it then? He asked, his voice bitter with the sting of defeat. You're just going to walk away, after everything we've been through? Yes, Michael, I am. I have to walk away. For me. Claire's heart felt heavy, but she knew it was the right decision. There was no other choice. Goodbye, Michael, she whispered, her voice breaking with the finality of the words. She hung up before he could say anything else. It was over. And yet, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a painful rebirth. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Claire had not expected the finality of her decision to feel so difficult. Every corner of her apartment felt like it held memories of him. His presence was everywhere. She had spent years building a life with Michael, and now she was left with the pieces of a broken dream. She had a lot to process, but there was also a part of her that knew this was the start of something new. Slowly, Claire began to pick up the pieces of her life. She contacted a therapist, someone she could trust, to help her navigate the emotional mess she had found herself in. She started spending more time with her friends, people who had always supported her, but whom she had neglected in the whirlwind of her relationship with Michael. One day, Amy invited Claire to a local art gallery, an opening for a young artist. Claire wasn't in the mood for art, but she needed to get out of the house to clear her mind. When they arrived, Claire was surprised to find that the artist was a woman. Her name was Olivia Stone, and she had been through her own battle of healing and self-discovery. Claire admired her work, which was full of raw emotion and powerful expressions of transformation. The pieces on display spoke to her in a way that words could not. "These are beautiful," Claire said quietly, as she stood in front of one of Olivia's larger pieces, a painting of a woman emerging from darkness, surrounded by light. "I see so much strength in them," Amy said, standing beside her. "It's like she's telling her own story through her art." "I think I understand that," Claire whispered. It was in that moment that she realized she was ready to start her own story, to rebuild herself, to heal. The weight of Michael's betrayal was still there, lingering, but it no longer had the power to define her. Claire walked away from the gallery that night with a new sense of purpose. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let her past define her. She was ready to embrace the future, even if it meant walking through the dark to get there. The weeks following her decision were both challenging and liberating. Claire had never imagined it would be so difficult to leave behind everything she thought was solid, to walk away from a life that she had built with someone she had once believed was her soulmate. The emptiness of her apartment was both comforting and suffocating at the same time. The walls, once filled with the echoes of laughter, now felt silent, as if holding their breath for what was to come next. The days dragged on, each one bringing a new emotional challenge. Some mornings, she woke up feeling like she could conquer the world, but other times, The pain of what she had lost would settle like a heavy blanket over her, suffocating any sense of joy. She spent long hours thinking about Michael, about the man he had become, about the betrayal that had shattered her trust. But more often than not, her thoughts turned to the future. What now? Who was Claire without the identity she had built around her relationship with Michael? Who was she beyond the wife, the partner, the woman who had always been defined by her connection to someone else? To answer that question, Claire knew she had to make a change. Something big, something bold. She couldn't stay in this apartment forever, stuck in the memories of her old life. So, she made a decision. She packed her things, not in haste, but with a quiet determination, and moved out of the place she had once shared with Michael. It wasn't just about leaving the physical space, it was about leaving behind the version of herself that had existed in that home. She wasn't running away from her past. She was reclaiming herself. She found a small but cozy apartment on the other side of town, away from the area where she had spent most of her life with Michael. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a blank canvas, a place where she could start fresh, without the weight of memories dragging her down. As she settled in, she found herself spending more time doing things she had long neglected. She took long walks in the park. She picked up the sketch pad she had abandoned years ago, and she started to paint. It was something she had always loved, but had put aside for years. Now, it felt like the only way to express the emotions swirling inside her: anger, grief, hope, and ultimately, the desire for healing. Her new routine was simple, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, Claire felt like she was beginning to find her balance again. One evening, as she worked on a piece of art that was coming to life on her canvas, she received a text from Amy. "You're going to love this. There's an art exhibit tomorrow night, Olivia Stone's work. She's a woman who's been through a lot, and I think you'll connect with her art. Want to go?" Claire hadn't heard of Olivia Stone, but she remembered the moment in the gallery when her own feelings had been stirred by Olivia's art. She had seen something in those pieces that spoke to her, a reflection of her own struggle, a representation of resilience and strength. Without thinking twice, Claire replied, "I'll be there. Thanks for the invite." The next evening, she found herself in a new gallery, surrounded by beautiful, haunting pieces of art. Olivia Stone's work was bold, raw, and emotional. Each piece seemed to capture a moment of transformation, a struggle between darkness and light. Claire felt a deep connection to the pieces, as if they were speaking to her directly, reflecting everything she had been through. As she wandered through the exhibit, she was drawn to one particular piece, a large canvas of a woman standing tall, her face half-shadowed, but with one hand reaching towards the light. It reminded her of the journey she had just begun. A woman who had been broken, but was now standing strong, ready to embrace the future. Amy caught up with her as she stood there, lost in thought. "I knew you'd love it," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Olivia's work is incredible. She's been through a lot, but she's come out the other side stronger. I think you two would really get along." Claire nodded, still mesmerized by the painting. It's like she's telling my story. It's like she knows exactly what I've been feeling." Amy smiled softly. "That's the power of art. It connects us in ways that words can't." Just as Claire was about to respond, a voice interrupted them. "I see you're enjoying the exhibit." Claire turned to see a woman standing beside them, holding a glass of wine. She was in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and an air of quiet confidence. "I'm Olivia," the woman introduced herself, offering her hand. "It's nice to meet someone who appreciates the work." Claire shook her hand, feeling an immediate sense of warmth and understanding in the woman's eyes. "Your art is amazing," Claire said, her voice sincere. "It's like it speaks to everything I've been through." Olivia smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Art has a way of doing that. It's my way of working through the things that are hard to put into words. I'm glad it resonates with you." The three of them spent the next hour talking about art, life, and the struggles that had shaped Olivia's work. Claire found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone else, sharing her journey and the pain of her broken marriage. Olivia listened intently, her gaze steady and compassionate. "It sounds like you've been through something that would break most people," Olivia said thoughtfully. "But it hasn't broken you, Claire. You're still standing, you're still fighting, and that's something worth celebrating." The words struck Claire deeply. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as Michael's wife, not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as Claire, the woman who had survived and was now ready to move forward. Olivia continued, "You're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by how you choose to move forward." That night, Claire left the gallery with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. The encounter with Olivia, the connection she had felt with the art, and the conversations she had shared with Amy had given her something more valuable than any comfort: hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were days when the pain of the past crept back into her thoughts. But she was learning to let go, to release the grip the past had on her, and to embrace the woman she was becoming. Claire knew the journey wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when she would wonder if she was strong enough. But for the first time in a long time, she believed in herself. She was ready to write her own story, one where she wasn't a victim, but a survivor. And as she walked out of the gallery, into the cool night air, Claire knew that no matter what came next, she would be okay. She had found her strength. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional journeys of strength, healing, and new beginnings, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join us for more powerful, real-life stories that will inspire and touch your heart. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share even more captivating stories with you. So, subscribe now and stay tuned for the next chapter in this journey. Thank you for being part of this community. Let's continue to grow together.